Welcome everyone to the second installment in our Summer Series of Service to America medals. This is a virtual event where we take an opportunity to learn more about the accomplishment of this year's Sammies Finalists. My name is James Christian Blockwood. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Partnership for Public Service, and it is my pleasure to moderate today's conversation. Today, we'll be talking about technology and how government, maybe contrary to what you often hear, is leading the way in using technology to change. We have three outstanding Sammies finalists who have harnessed the power of technology innovation to impact our lives every day in very real ways. First, it would be my pleasure to introduce a colleague of the partnership and an incredible innovator himself, Craigslist founder, Craig Newmark. Craig, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I want to offer some serious congratulations to all 30 Sammies finalists, who are people doing seriously important work in areas. They range from healthcare to foreign affairs, to environmental protection, to national defense. I'm honored to be part of this year's selection committee and to get the word out about these real success stories in federal service. The deal is that the American people often don't know what the federal government is doing and why it matters, and these stories can help the American people understand what the deal is. Now, I'm a technologist, and I've seen firsthand repeatedly over decades that the federal government does big important work in technology. In reality, the federal government is a big hub of innovation, and today's finalists are a great example of that. For example, the federal government did work leading to the actual creation and birth of the internet. Our government created the GPS systems, which help us kind of every day, helping us get around town. These tools are born of basic research that federal workers make happen, and that later these tools can be commercialized in real, daily, everyday life for consumers. As someone who founded a pretty successful internet company, I'm grateful for the foundational government done by the federal government, which is a great deal. People often forget about how much really goes on. The American people forget how much we owe the federal government. So that's why I think it's really important that the government be able to tell its story in a way that really matters. That's why I'm seriously working with the Partnership for Public Service on initiatives in that space. Congratulations again to the finalists. Please enjoy today's conversation.
The federal government being a hub for innovation and technology, certainly something to remember. Craig, thank you again for joining us today and for all of your support in this important work elevating success stories in government, particularly those around technology. We're going to meet three Sammies finalists now who have each made a major impact in harnessing the power of technology, and each in incredibly different ways. And first up, we have Stephen Musser, who in his role at the Food and Drug Administration has developed a new tool called Genome Tracker, and a crowdsourced approach to identifying foodborne illness outbreak, which has helped tainted products off shelves faster and help keep Americans safer. Steve, very nice to have you here. And let's maybe just start with one question. What brought you to the FDA initially?
Oh, thanks, James. Well, that was quite a long time ago. That was now 31 years ago that I came from the NIH to FDA, and I was just looking for a temporary job before I went into a pharmaceutical area, and I liked working in the foods arena so much that 31 years later, I'm still here. It's a great job protecting America's food supply.
And 31 years well spent. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about your role at the FDA and how the average consumer might experience that?
Sure. So there's 6 product centers at FDA. I happen to work at the Center for Foods. Many of you are probably more familiar with the drug side, but foods is also part of FDA. And So every time people eat, I'm somehow involved. We have, the infant formula crisis going on right now. That falls to us. Cosmetics falls to me. Food additives, anything that you eat, any outbreak that occurs with illness and a recall, that is what I do and what my center does. And we are out there every day trying to intervene and prevent illness and keep food products safe.
Yeah, you're out there every day, and we're glad that you are. Can we talk a little bit more specifically about this genome tracker? Can you tell us more about what it is? And from what I hear, this came from a eureka moment for you. Can you also tell us a little bit more about what sparked that moment?
Yeah, good. I was happy to. So it was in the mid 2000s, we were struggling with a lot of outbreaks that had occurred, and we really didn't know where they came from, how they occurred, and we were always too far behind. Hundreds of people ending up getting sick. There were some famous ones related to produce like spinach, tomatoes, peppers, that sort of thing. And I was charged at the time with finding a replacement and for the system that we currently had. So we had been really spending a lot of time looking at everything that was available. We had a number of meetings, lots of people involved. We had DARPA involved at one point, trying to get people helping out. And when we used sequencing the first time, we had a little test set of data, and we were trying to separate three contaminated things: pepper, black pepper, red pepper, and pistachios. They were all contaminated with salmonella, and they were all involved in an outbreak, but we didn't know which one. And when we did the sequencing on it, it was obvious that it was black pepper. It was so obvious that it was like, looking from one room to another room. There was that much space between them. And it was also obvious that there was so much definition in the technology that for years to come, we would be able to resolve outbreaks. So it wasn't like a technology that would be here and then replaced. It was going to be around for a while, and it had the potential to really work out and help us solve things in ways we had never done before.
Seeing all very complex, complicated stuff. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the previous infrastructure of tracking foodborne pathogens, and the work that you've done on this updated genome tracker, and maybe give us a sense of what we had and what we have now?
Okay, have to maybe work in analogies. So the old system was something that was a very low resolution technology, and the other issue associated with it was very much only monitoring clinical illness, so people that got sick. So consequently, what we knew from the old system was generally that a group of people were sick, but we didn't know how they got sick. We didn't know. And what we needed going forward was a higher resolution system that would also help us do things retrospectively, so that we could look at things that happened in the past and compare them to what was happening now, which is something good about genomics. And it's sort of like prisoners, that are let out of jail because they didn't commit the crime. Years later, the data is available and they're not linked to it. So very similarly, you use the same technology to imply that something is involved or not. And so it was a very much more accurate and much more easy way at the end of the day to see what was going on. Many times when we have outbreaks, we don't know where they come from. So let's say you ate a salad. You might have tomatoes in the salad, you might have peppers, onions, lettuce, all sorts of other things that might be there. In today's world, we have a global economy. So those ingredients in that salad may have come from anywhere in the world, depending on what time of year it is. So what we can do with this technology that we couldn't do before is we can get some idea of where that pathogen may have come from, which is something we couldn't do before. So we can say, well, maybe it looks like that's coming from California, or maybe that's looking like it's coming from Indonesia or Europe or somewhere else. And that really helps us narrow down where and what might have happened. And it's something that we just couldn't do before. The other thing we can do now that we couldn't do before is we can, let's say we do an inspection of a facility, we find a pathogen there, they clean it up or they don't. Years later, we have another outbreak. We can say instantly that they're involved or that product is involved, and it really shortens the amount of time that it takes to get us involved and do a recall. What that translates to for people is that we have many fewer people sick. We can intervene, many fewer sick, fewer people hospitalized, and fewer people die. We have lots of really good data on that now, and it's very impressive at how worldwide it's solving outbreaks and making the food supply safer.
Yeah, just incredible. A lot of engagement there. Now, can you tell us, how do you actually engage the broader population? So if you do learn about one particular product or another, you talked a lot about tracking there, but how do you engage the broader population?
Well, okay, let me make sure I understand. So once we identify the FDA and CDC, other public health laboratories across the nation and the world are all linked together. Something called a competent authority that can look at the data. And we'll work together to say, yes, it looks like that product is involved. FDA has the authority for the product, and then CDC would also be updating the information to consumers saying, if you have this product, you should return it, or you should take it back or not use it or destroy it. So we have really now a worldwide network of public health folks that use this information every day to provide information to consumers and industry on those products.
Yeah, and in this worldwide environment, I imagine building those relationships with international organizations and countries who themselves are either monitoring or some maybe are not monitoring. Can you talk about what that collaboration looks like, what maybe some of the challenges in working with international organizations and countries may be?
Sure. So I just got back from Brussels, where I was doing this very thing. We were meeting with WHO and FAO to try and get their collaboration and help in countries around the world. In this case, we're working with FAO on agricultural water and its impact on agricultural products and food safety. One of the biggest problems that we face is an issue of trade. You imagine a country that's developing and they have a few small products that their country's economy actually depends on them exporting. They're afraid they don't want to get pinned on these products being contaminated or their country being somehow involved in an outbreak. And so we've been really trying to work through international channels on not having that happen. So being more preventative, using the technology in a way that they can evaluate their food systems before it becomes problematic and before the product gets exported. So we're trying to figure out how to use this technology to add value to their products so that their economy isn't impacted, at the same time reducing the possibility of illness and preventing it from even coming into the country to begin with. So it's a very complicated network, lots of travel for me, lots of calls, lots of conversation, lots of Zoom meetings, which I can tell you are not as good as the face-to-face meetings.
That's right. And I imagine lots of technological innovation. And contrary to popular belief, the federal government is a place for innovative technology. And that doesn't preclude there being some challenges. What were some of the biggest challenges in developing innovative technology from your view?
The biggest problem the federal government faces is IT. And what to do with all the data, how to serve it out. That was something we had to face right away. We knew that even with the low technology version that we were replacing, there were storage and serving issues, which got us involved with NIH and the National Center for Biotechnology Information. You may know them. They're the people that do PubMed and have all the digital data. When we talked to them 10 years ago, they were serving out to the public about 4 terabytes of data a day. They're up to around 10 or 11 terabytes of data that they serve out. They're a giant library. That's what they do. And so we talked to NIH and said, hey, can you partner with us so that we don't have to do this and we'll just work with you? And they said, sure, which was great, but you have to make all the data public because those are the rules. If it was acquired with taxpayer data or dollars, you have to make it all public. And so that was the biggest hurdle, was figuring out how to get a data structure that didn't reveal people's identity, but also allowed the data to be public. And once we did that, things worked out really well. But we have I think, one of the most efficient IT systems that's available right now by partnering with NIH.
That's excellent. Very good. And just when you talk about a lot of data, you talk about the technology, can you further describe some of the applications of the technology you're using and how that affects everyday people in their everyday lives?
Sure. Got lots of good examples. One of the things that is really interesting to me is we used to take a lot of time to figure out antimicrobial resistance and the spread of antimicrobial resistance. And it turns out it's all in the genetic code of the pathogens. And so it was through some software engineering, now everything that's sequenced, we automatically extract the AMR profile. So we can look not only now, but in the past, what's happening with antimicrobial resistance, spread, use of antimicrobial products throughout the world, and we can manage them in a better way so that we don't end up in a situation where our newest generation antibiotics don't work for illness. So that was one really interesting thing. We also got some money during the COVID crisis to look at wastewater analysis. So the problem there was we know that we're seeing rises and falls of COVID, but we didn't know which variants. And from a development perspective, our approving officials were having trouble with, will the vaccines be appropriate? Will they work? How is that going to be effective? CDC had a program that they were looking at just COVID itself. And we said, well, maybe we can use our network to look at rise and fall of variants in wastewater. And it turns out it works great. And you can look at it real time and watch the rise and fall of new variants in the population by looking at wastewater. We had 23 sites around the nation, and it was extremely valuable. Our vaccine approvers could look at it and say, yeah, it looks like this is going to be an issue, or no, it's not going to be an issue. How can we use that information to advise on vaccines? And it's become extremely valuable. I could go on all day with other things, but I think those two will be good for this.
Yes, very, very complex stuff. And I am certainly glad to have such smart individuals like yourself working on behalf of the American public every day. Last question for you. What does it mean to be recognized as a Service to America Medals finalist?
Well, it's a huge honor. And to be honest, I really didn't even know about the Sammies. So when I was nominated and did the interview, I did some research, and I have to say I'm really impressed. The people that have won this award in the past, long, prestigious group of people, and I really couldn't be more honored to be here today and to have been nominated for this award. It's a true honor, and something I think that reflects well on the program we developed. And thank you so much for including me today and for the honor of being a Sammies finalist.
Yes, definitely an impressive list of finalists and winners. And glad to have you. Thank you so much for being here with us. Congratulations on your recognition. And now if we can, let's—
James.
Yeah, absolutely. And now if we can, let's please turn our attention to Brandon Wales. He's Executive Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Brandon has been instrumental in leading the government response to numerous cyber attacks and is recognized as an international leader in the cybersecurity space. Brandon, welcome.
No, James, thank you so much. Really happy to be here.
Absolutely. And let's just start with how you were able to be the steady hand amongst numerous cyber attacks, as well as unexpected shifts in leadership. This is certainly a very complicated time to be doing the work that you're doing.
Sure. It's been in pretty incredible 18 months, and actually even longer when you consider the work that we were doing even before I took over as acting director of the agency back in November of 2020. Just in the aftermath of the election, we had spent a lot of time working with our state and local election officials, helping them to ensure the security of the 2020 election. The former director, Chris Krebs, was fired November 17th, and I was thrust into the role of acting director of the agency only weeks before we discovered probably one of the largest and most sophisticated attacks, cyber attacks that the U.S. government has faced. This one coming from Russian intelligence services who had penetrated multiple government agencies, multiple critical infrastructure entities. And the U.S. government had to kind of organize a response right in the midst of a turbulent post-election environment and a leadership transition that was only weeks away from happening. I think I give a lot of credit to the workforce here at CISA, who really rose to the occasion and ensured that despite all of the outside extraneous things happening, that we were able to keep our eye on the ball, that we were able to kind of focus on the important work that we had to do, that we had to build this kind of collaborative relationship with our government partners who were part of the response, work closely with the private sector. I think it's just my experience with this agency kind of allowed me to kind of see where we needed to go and keep our attention on what mattered most to us.
Yeah, and we're very thankful for your leadership and all the efforts of your team. Can you tell us a little bit more about stopransomware.gov? Where did it originate? And then how do you envision the federal government communicating with the public more broadly on real threats and the implications of cyber threats?
Sure, it's an important question because I think this agency, CISA, was really formed to be this nation's cyber defense agency, to be able to communicate effectively with the American people, with the critical infrastructure community, with our state and local governments about what they need to do to take cybersecurity more seriously, make sure that their systems are protected. And because these are the systems that enable our way of life. They ensure we have power and water. They ensure that we can move freely around the country. And it's why they're so essential. I would say early in 2021, we knew that we had seen over the past year the rise of ransomware. We were seeing more serious cases of ransomware incidents happen. They were hitting large municipalities in the country. We had seen incidents in places like Baltimore and in Atlanta and elsewhere that were having significant effects on the ability for those municipalities to operate. We were seeing big businesses that were being impacted. So we needed to do more. And so in March of that year, 2021, we kind of launched an effort to over the course of 12 or so weeks, every week focus on a different aspect of the ransomware challenge and the kinds of things that businesses and communities could do to make sure that their systems were protected. Right in the middle of that, we had the large ransomware incident that affected Colonial. Shortly thereafter, we had another incident affecting JBS Foods, a large meat producing company. And was working with our executive assistant director in charge of our cybersecurity division, who said, you know what, we've been providing a lot of guidance, both us and our interagency partners, whether it's the FBI or some of the sector-specific agencies like HHS, helping the healthcare sector, or Treasury for financial services. And he said we needed to find one place to get all this information together. So over the course of the next several weeks, we created the idea of kind of stopransomware.gov. It's a one-stop resource for anyone, whether you're a government or public sector entity or you're a private entity who needs better information on how to secure your systems. And this could be the one-stop shop. So we were able to launch that in mid to late 2021 to be that single repository. And then, every day since, we've been constantly updating it with new information as we generate it that can be critical to helping companies, big and small alike, make sure that they're not impacted by this scourge.
Yes, and the federal government is a huge enterprise, and the general public normally knows of some of the agencies, maybe some better than others. How did being a relatively newer agency impact your work, and how are you able to integrate with other federal agencies and governmental organizations?
Sure, it's a great question, and it's one that we get fairly often. And I think the idea being, being a relatively new agency has its pros and cons. On the con side, we don't necessarily have the long history that enables us to kind of have that brand recognition that places like the FBI have developed over decades. But it does mean that we have the ability to be a bit more nimble, that we can, experiment with new ways of doing business. And I think this agency is really about collaboration. It's an agency that was kind of purpose-built for partnership with the government and partnership with industry. And a lot of our authorities go directly to that point, to give us tools that we could use to help us integrate with the government, help us integrate with the private sector, so that we can bring together all the necessary information that's out there and put it in one place, so we can be an effective communicator, an effective partner, and an effective collaborator on the cybersecurity challenges that this country is facing. And they're significant, they're severe. I think a few weeks don't go by before there's another incident that makes headlines. And we spend a lot of time trying to understand how we can do that job better, how we can be a better partner for the people that we work with every day. And partly that is helped by the fact that we're a new agency who was really designed for this, and has the ability to kind of work hard to kind of put in place new projects and new programs as we see the need, and are not necessarily bound by having to do things the same way we did them for the past 50 or 60 years, because that's built into the culture of the agency. We're able to build a new culture directly meeting the kind of threats and challenges this country is facing right now.
Well, while I am certainly appreciative, and really we should all be appreciative of your efforts and your agency's efforts, much of what you do will likely go unknown. You oversaw a lot of different cascading series of cyber and ransomware attacks, including, I believe, SolarWinds, which may be a little more known by some. What was the most difficult part of that project, and how did that differ from many others, at least those that you can talk about?
Sure. So I think one of the things that really set SolarWinds apart was really the scale, and the length of time that the adversary had been able to kind of compromise various networks. So SolarWinds was a campaign that was launched by the Russian intelligence service as a means to collect intelligence, sensitive but unclassified intelligence from both the government and industry. And to do that, they compromised a company called SolarWinds and put a backdoor in a patch. So we're out there all the time telling people to patch their networks, keep their software up to date. Well, in this case, the adversary had adulterated that patch and put a backdoor into it, so that when customers of SolarWinds product, which helps companies manage their networks, updated their software to the latest version, it included this backdoor, and the Russians used that backdoor to gain access to a large number of networks. And they were extremely sophisticated about how they did that, and they were very quiet. And they only siphoned off very targeted information as a way to not alert the network owners that there was someone inside of their systems. And it meant that they were able to be inside of some networks for months, and in one case almost a year. They were inside of networks, being able to kind of see information and keep track of what was happening inside of those networks. They used that access to gain access to cloud environments like Microsoft Office 365 environments, look at email and other file stores. It was extremely sophisticated, and the adversary had a lot of awareness of what was happening. And so our ability to respond, to understand what the adversary did, what they did on those networks, and what we could do to help get them off those networks without having them burrow in even deeper, was an incredible challenge. And I think it was really just, again, a testament to a team of really incredible cyber operators that work here at the agency, that were able to kind of piece together how to execute an incident response to that incident, to help multiple different government agencies that were affected, to work with the private sector that were affected by this incident, provide them guidance, help them understand what happened to their network, provide them advice and guidance on how to remove the adversary from their network. It was a painstaking process, and one that took months to effectively execute. So having that kind of staying power, despite the fact there were other incidents being thrown at us at a fairly alarming clip during that period, was probably the biggest challenge that we faced.
Yeah, a lot of good work going on in the background by you and your team. Very thankful for that. And I would imagine if you're doing your job well, then the general public is largely removed from what's going on and by ways of cyber attacks and other things. But the fact is that they can affect schools, hospitals, a number of things that we interact with every day. How is your work connected to the public? And quite frankly, how can the public support your work?
Yeah, so I will say a couple of things on that because I think it's an incredibly important point, in that information systems kind of underpin everything that we do. During the course of the day, you're going to interact with variety of systems, whether the systems we use to communicate, like we're doing right now, whether the systems we use to make sure we've got gas in our motors, the systems that control the meat plants and the farms that deliver us food. The water that we drink is tracked and ensured that it's good enough to drink by IT systems and operational technology systems. You cannot escape the fact that cyber systems enable our way of life. And those systems need to be protected because we know that adversaries are out there looking for ways to exploit those systems, to hold our systems at risk. And we don't want to let that happen. We know that other groups are out there looking to profit off of disruptions like the ransomware incidents that we've seen just explode over the past several years. And the American public, every single person has a role to play. Because cybersecurity is not something that's just done by the federal government. It's not something that's just done by large corporations. It's done by individuals and people at home and at work across the country every single day. We need them to be kind of cyber smart and to take the advice that we provide and others provide about how to be more secure online. Because if you've got good practices at home, you're probably going to have good practices at the office and vice versa. So every American should do things like ensure they're using multi-factor authentication on their systems. They should patch and update their systems. Despite what happened during SolarWinds, they should patch and update their systems so that that the latest security patches and updates are installed. So there is something that every American can do, and every bit of that contributes to the overall cybersecurity of our nation, and that's something that we should all be working and striving for.
That's fantastic. And I know that the federal government could always use more support and more workers that are interested in cybersecurity issues. Maybe you could help inspire by giving us a sense of how you first became interested and involved in cybersecurity, and maybe what drew you to a federal government career.
Sure. So, I've been in public service for a long time. I think just over 18 years now. And it's really the career that I always wanted, to support the security of our country. And I've had the opportunity to do it, and it's been incredibly rewarding. I came to cybersecurity probably different than some. But I think it goes to an underlying point that I often make, which is that cybersecurity is not just about people with a computer science degree staring at ones and zeros on a screen or fighting an adversary inside of a computer network, trying to keep them out. That there's a lot of different people involved in this with a lot of different skills, whether it's in the legal profession or the human capital sphere, to make sure that we can hire the next generation of a diverse and talented workforce. I came through it more from the policy end. I had worked on the Hill. I came to the Department of Homeland Security early in its creation. And was working on our analytic efforts, trying to understand the impact of infrastructure failures and disruptions and how they propagate in complex systems. In 2012, I was asked to lead a project coming out of an executive order that President Obama had signed, requiring us to look at which critical infrastructure had the potential for causing catastrophic impacts if they had been disrupted via a cyber incident. And over the course of the next 6 months working on this project, I really got kind of pulled into this line of work, and it really just continued from there. I had an opportunity to work for the secretary at the department as a senior senior counselor for cybersecurity and resilience. And then coming back to CISA, I was able to take on the executive director role under former director Krebs, helping to serve as a senior career official here and really lead this agency during the transition and all of the cyber attacks that happened. But ultimately, I think that there's a career in cybersecurity for a lot of people. CISA is absolutely hiring and is always looking for new talent that could help us execute our mission.
That's great. And what a fulsome and impactful career you have had thus far. Last question for you. What does it mean to you to be recognized as a Service to America Medals finalist?
Yeah, James, I mean, I'll just say, I've spent pretty much my entire career in public service. And so being recognized for that amongst the tens of thousands and of really talented public servants that are working on behalf of the American people every day is an absolute honor, and it's something that I'll always remember.
Brandon, thank you so much for being with us today, and congratulations on being a Sammies finalist.
No, thank you so much, James. Good luck.
Finally, today, let's please meet Ian Coddington, a scientist at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who is a part of a Sammies nominated team for their work on developing a novel way of detecting methane leaks at oil fields using something called a laser comb. That is a great example of foundational scientific research developed into a practical application that benefits the public. Ian Coddington, welcome to you. And let me just first start off by asking for you to help explain to a non-technical audience, myself included, what exactly is a frequency comb and how does it work?
Yeah, so frequency comb is it's a very novel type of laser. Was actually demonstrated first by Jan Hall and NIST and TED in Germany, and kind of led to the Nobel Prize for them. So it was something that was right from the get-go. Everybody realized, oh, this is going to be a game-changing laser technology. But the easiest way to talk about it, I think, is in terms of what it can do. And the thing that it can really do is it gives us control of phase and frequency, or reference, which ultimately means control phase and frequency across the optical spectrum. And one way to think about why that's important is the reason you can make a phone call on your cell phone in a crowded shopping mall is because we have this exquisite control over the phase and frequency of these RF tones that oscillate at 1 million cycles per second or 1 billion cycles per second. But with the frequency comb, we can now start to have equivalent control at 1 trillion cycles per second. And what's exciting is there's a lot of applications where the precision and the accuracy scale directly with that carrier frequency. So suddenly you can start making measurements 1,000 times more precisely. And the other thing that it does, which is also really exciting and hard to reconcile with that first point, unless you think about it very mathematically, but you'll just have to take my word for it. It also behaves like roughly about 1 million well-behaved lasers. Like you normally think of a laser pointer as giving you a nice, clean red tone. Well, this will do that, but instead of just giving you one red tone, it'll give you 100,000 red tones and 100,000 orange tones that are all slightly different. It's a little bit like opening up your box of Crayolas and you have 6,000 colors of green. And why that's interesting is that you can shine that light up through the air, and molecules like methane, they might really interact very strongly or absorb light that, maybe green number 112, but they don't want to have anything to do with green number 114. And CO2 has its preferences, water has its preferences. So you can kind of shine this light through the air, and by looking at exactly which of these colors came back, you can get a very precise measure of what gases were in that air and also how much was there. So it turns out to be a really interesting spectroscopic instrument in addition to this really precise control of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yes. And I very much appreciate the non-technical answer there. And at least that tells me just how complex this work is, likely with a lot of smart people over a fairly long period of time working on this. What inspired you and your team to innovate upon something like the frequency comb, and in particular to create a product that is both space and cost efficient, from what I understand?
Yeah, well, okay. So if you'd seen the first frequency comb, the idea of innovating for space and cost would not be surprising. The first ones were these kind of sprawling experiments that filled up an entire lab and usually had 2 or 3 PhD scientists hovering over them constantly in order to make them work. So there's plenty of room for improvement. And even though it was such a promising laser source, it was pretty clear that to have any impact on the greater world, you had to make it more practical. And conveniently, we're able to operate these systems with technology that is very similar to the technology that's the core of the internet, the optical fiber communications. So you can actually, it turns out you can build these lasers with the same optical fiber that makes YouTube go. And when you do that, you eliminate a lot of these things that can misalign on you. Suddenly the light is trapped in these little glass wires, and then you can spool them up and put them in a small box. And much like the internet is extremely robust, these devices can suddenly start to be really robust too. It was a observation that was kind of first put forward by Nate Newberry, who's one of the team members that was honored here. And then the rest of us kind of joined later, and we're able to take the next generation of telecommunications components and build something even more robust. And that was exciting, because as soon as you had that missing piece where you could start thinking of all these applications that were outside the laboratory. And of course, if you want to make an impact, that's where the applications have to be.
Yeah, it's clear that you're making an impact here. And, I would ask you, how do you see this technology continuing to make an impact? And in what areas might you see potential for applications that are not yet being used?
Yeah, I mean, we're absolutely just getting started. And a lot of the current ones that, at the moment, these devices have been a great way to measure methane leaks from oil and gas fields, but you can modify that technology a little bit, and you can also look at CO2 emissions from a city. Uh, Cities are a major source of greenhouse gases, but at the moment, the only way we really know how to quantify the emissions from a city is to essentially take the number of vehicles and multiply by some scaling factor, and the power plants and multiply by some scaling factor. So we do it essentially by accounting. We don't really do it by measurement, and that's all great as long as the numbers that you're using in your accounting are right. But at some point, you need to verify that. And particularly as we try and create policies to change the emissions of these cities, you want some sort of feedback mechanism. So just like frequency combs are really great at measuring, methane, which is an important greenhouse gas that tends to come at least partially out of the oil and gas infrastructure. You can also look at CO2 and emissions there. And then you can start to play even more complicated tricks. You can take this kind of robust fiber technology and do a little bit of nonlinear optics right at the end, which doesn't add too much complexity. I mean, there's some cost, but you can expand to different spectral regions where you can actually see much more rarefied species. Things like N2O, which is a third most important greenhouse gas, and it's actually one of the most challenging to measure. But also things that really impact air quality. You can look at formaldehyde or volatile organic chemicals that often are associated with these oil and gas wells or other industrial processes. And suddenly you can start to correlate the presence of a lot of these molecules. And that's kind of nice, because you can start to do attribution. You can know if I'm seeing methane emission from or methane emission and ethane emission at the same time, I know I'm looking at something that's coming out of a well. Or if I see methane and ammonia at the same time, I know, oh, this is a cow. Or some agricultural site. And so suddenly you can build on the complexity. You can take advantage of the fact that we can see multiple of these species, and actually make sure you're assigning your sources to the right economic sectors, which is, I think, going to be important, especially as we try and tamp down or regulate these gases. And then there's a whole, I don't know if it's even worth getting into here. The first analogy that I meant or talked about the precise or control of the electromagnetic spectrum. There's a whole rat's nest or blossoming garden of possibilities that are coming out of that. And half the team right now is working on essentially using these combs to compare clocks at a very precise level, to synchronize clocks at sort of femtosecond level. And GPS is essentially just a network of clocks that are synchronized really precisely. We're looking at ways that you could do that maybe a factor of 1,000 more precisely, and hopefully have sort of similar applications.
Yes, I mean, I can only imagine the testing, the experimentation, and that this would probably happen in a highly controlled environment. Can you give us a sense of what were some of the challenges on the development side, but then also on the operational or application side?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we started pursuing this methane work, where we're looking at oil and gas infrastructure leaks. We thought we could do it. We promised that we could do it, but really we had a system that was very temperamental, and we had a path that we thought might work out. But there was a lot of kind of scrambling to make the system work in a real world environment. The first thing you do is you build a system that you think is going to work, and you try it. And what was really nice is NIST had a lot of facilities where we could take a design and we could put it on a shaker table and really beat the heck out of it and make sure we know what level of operation or operational noise it could withstand. And then there was some very early on experiments where we took a system to we have very close collaboration with University of Colorado, and it's been fruitful in a lot of ways, especially with this methane monitoring. They're very much able to lead the charge on that. But one of the earlier experiments we did is we actually went to a power plant in the University of Colorado and set up one of these systems. And it was an environment where, even talking 10 feet from each other, we would pretty much have to yell to have anybody understand anything. It was an intensely noisy environment. And it was a great opportunity to sort of test these systems and to really kind of push the technology to make sure it worked in the relevant conditions. And,
Well, you are clearly very passionate about this work and clearly very good at it. What drew you to this work, and importantly, what drew you to NIST in particular?
Yeah, NIST was a little bit of a happy accident for me, to be honest. I was looking at a number of things after I finished graduate school, and I had worked on some very basic science, sort of atomic physics applications, and I felt like I wanted something a little bit more applied, which put NIST on my radar. But the other thing is my wife is also a PhD scientist, and we're looking for places we could both get work. And this seemed like a really great opportunity from that perspective. But then once I started working here, I mean, I've honestly never looked back. It's such a fantastic environment, both in terms of collaborations and resources. And also as a government employee, I hadn't really appreciated this as a graduate student. I sort of assumed government was really just like an extension of academia, but there's an awful lot more you can get involved in. It's much easier in some respects to interact with industry because you're a trusted partner. It's much easier to be sort of at the cutting edge of a lot of technology because of that relationship as well. And it's much easier to assemble these large teams that have lots of different proficiencies. On our team, Nate and I are atomic physicists, but Kevin is a chemist. We have electrical engineers. We're really able to get this broad base of knowledge together in a way that's harder to do in other environments. And at the same time, we do have the freedom to explore a lot of the technologies that we are excited about and look really promising to us. So it's really kind of an ideal arrangement all around. So.
Well, it certainly sounds like an ideal arrangement. What do you want the public to know about public service?
Yeah, for me, like I said, it was a happy accident, but I haven't looked back, and there's a couple things that have been really nice about it. It is such a collaborative environment, but also it's an opportunity to make an impact in ways that I don't know that I would have been able to otherwise. The the technology that we did early on, or the development that we did early on to look at methane leaks from oil and gas infrastructure, that has now spun off into a company, and that company is off um, really going great guns. They're looking at I don't know, something like 300 acres of facilities right now, and every time they drop down a new system, it's mitigating something like 400 million cubic feet of methane emission per system per year. That's way more environmental impact that I could imagine having on any other sort of research project. And NIST was, government service, and NIST and the capabilities here were very much a part of making that happen.
That's great. And my final question for you, what does it mean to be a Sammies finalist?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. You guys had that Sammy's kickoff back in May, where you brought many of us together and sort of introduced the finalists. And what was most striking about that is everybody I talked to at that uh, gathering had done something extraordinary. I mean, it's an honor to be a part of that group, and um, I really appreciate both you're acknowledging us and that context, but also all the other finalists as well. So
Yes, and you've said it best that all of you are doing extraordinary things. Ian, so glad you could join us today, and congratulations on being recognized as a Sammy finalist. I'd like to also thank the audience for tuning in today. We'll be back in just a couple of weeks to unveil our Sammy's People's Choice honoree as the next conversation as part of our summer series. And speaking of People's Choice, you have a few days left to cast your vote for your favorite Sammy's stories. You can vote now. You can learn more about our finalists at servicetoamericamedals.com. And I just wanted to, again, thank all of our finalists for their service, for their very powerful stories. And thank you all for watching. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the afternoon.